other states that have more to offer at this particular moment, like Connecticut with a 35% tax increase that has the New York crew base and people who live in New York who don't want to travel to the Midwest. We get close enough to that incentive, they're not going to choose Michigan. They're going to choose another state. Two, if you represent to Hollywood or digital gaming, I don't want to just use the phrase Hollywood, Hollywood television, digital gaming, that you are nervous, that you are an insecure state, that you are the kind of state that passes a law and less than 2 years later changes it, they're not coming. Would you? Hollywood is a business that exists on deficit financing. It exists on people lending money for you to go get a project. Any filmmakers in here know that this is true. And if you're an independent filmmaker, it's no different when you get to the $25 million level, the 50 or the 100. Everybody is borrowing money, trying to make a good bet on an investment. Well, it's not a good bet to go to a place that looks skittish about its incentives. And if you saw what happened in Iowa, where, you know, there was fraud and all of a sudden that thing is gone, that has everybody in Hollywood scared of the Midwest, because the impression of our states out here is that we're these sort of wannabes, but we don't really understand the industry, and as soon as we get into it, we get scared and we yank it back. And who wants to invest in shaky ground? Who would invest in quicksand? Nobody. And I have to say that that's the way we're coming across to people out in Hollywood now, because we are. We've got a legislator that keeps threatening to do something to this thing, but doesn't, then threatens, then doesn't, then threatens. And every one of those rumors finds its way right out there, and some movie producer or some studio who's trying to decide, do I bring this film here or do I bring it someplace else, goes to the place that's been stable for years, like a New Mexico, like a Connecticut. So we're going to lose that business. And so when people say, well, we'll increase the infrastructure credit, I have to laugh. I said, what difference does it make? You can make it 100% infrastructure credit. If films aren't coming here, nobody's going to build a studio. You have to be solid, consistent, and lead the way. I have made many suggestions to the people involved in this thing, and they know who they are, as to ways if we need to save money, because I'm a citizen of the state, you all are, we all are. We don't want to see education cut for the sake of this. We don't want to see important programs cut while this is left totally alone. But there are ways of making small trims to this, tightening up some of the loose things that we've now had a chance to observe, that would make this a money-saving venture without having to cut the thing that attracts people to come here, that being the big marquee value of this. There are ways to do it. I've done it. I've worked on it. I've worked with people on it. I've presented it. And for some reason, some people don't want to hear it. Some people just have it in their craw that they want to attack this thing for some reason. I don't know why. Because you cannot measure the effect that this has on our state. You cannot measure, for example, the story that was in the Free Press today about a studio that opened up in the western part of the state. Now, not only is that a business that wasn't going to be here if we didn't do that, but that's two people who were going to live in Los Angeles who decided to live here. And it's their wives or kids who stay here, and it's the people they employ who stay here. And it's the thought process. When I was out in Los Angeles this weekend, you know how many people I met who were waiters, shoe salesmen, clothing salesmen, but they were there because of the movie business. And they were hoping to break into it. But while they're there, they're working and paying taxes and living there. And that's citizenry that we can keep here. We can attract here. We can keep our own young people who have dreams of doing things that are creative and want to stay in Michigan, like those guys I wrote about in the Free Press. They just want to be here. We have this natural resource of people who love their state. That's an amazing thing. People want to stay in the state. They're just looking for a reason to stay here. And if they do, they pay taxes, and they buy houses, and they pay property taxes, and they help prop up the schools, and you can't put that down on a piece of paper. So when people are trying to come up with fuzzy math about, oh, this costs this or this costs that, you can't figure what a new industry does. Could you ever have really measured the auto industry when it was growing? Could you ever have come in at any one particular point and stuck a thermometer in the auto industry in 1942 and 1956 and 1967 and say, this is exactly what it's worth? Of course not. But you knew that it was building and it was growing. Well, the auto industry is not going in that direction. We all know that. And we have to find things that are going in that direction. And those things require an invitation. We're asking an outside industry to come in here and try to set up shop. We're asking an outside industry to give us some time so we can train our people to be as good as the quality people they're used to working with. And we've set up an incentive system so that you get 40% off if you hire Michigan people. So we've set up a great equation to try to encourage them to use our people, use our facilities, use our studios, but you've got to let it grow. You don't put a seed in the ground, cover it with dirt, put a little water on it, come back the next day, look at it and say, nothing there, and stop on it. That's not the way you grow an industry. And I urge all the lawmakers who can hear this or hear about this, please give it a little time. It was $38 million that we paid out last year. Now, while $38 million would certainly change my life or your life, in a budget deficit that's what, $1.8 billion? $38 million is not what's ruining the state. But if we make a slash in this thing, we will ruin this. Because it's about perception more than it is dollars. It's about being perceived as a state that doesn't have the guts to build an industry. And we should not be perceived that way. Give it a couple years. It's not going to cost or break the bank. I've seen the numbers. This year's production's probably not going to be any more than last year's production. And that's not right. You know why? Because people are nervous and they don't come here. So we're basically flat for this next coming year as it is. So we're not going to break the bank. We're not going to be the reason that the kids don't get educated in Michigan. We're not going to be the reason that the state falls apart. But if they do make these changes that some people are proposing, it will be the reason that this thing turns from something going this way to goes this way. And everybody in this room deserves better. I can't help but remember as I'm standing here looking at you, when we passed this thing, we had a meeting. Maybe some of you were there. It was at Grace and Wild Studios. It was called about 5 days ahead of time, 4 days ahead of time. We came up with the idea. And we had 850 people showed up who were interested in the growth of this business. They were excited. They filled the room. They spilled out into the outside. They were watching on TV screens because they couldn't all fit in. That was enthusiasm personified in the state of Michigan. It was such an exciting room to be in. It was like, wow, growth. What a concept. We have something that's growing. It was stuffed with people. And now here I am less than 2 years later on a stage talking to people who are worried about that going away. And we have to gather and fill a room because we're worried about it being taken away. There's something wrong with that. We shouldn't kill something enthusiastic and something that reflects dreams of growth. Dreams of growth are how you build and keep your people here. And I urge anybody who has a say, contact your legislators, tell them that there is a smart way to do this, but don't come at it with a hatchet, because you are going to stomp on that little seed that's in the ground, and when it's gone, you can't come back and plant it again. You get one crack at this thing, and then you're not taken seriously. We need to be taken seriously, and these things need to be left alone. All right. That's all I have to say.